Here, I got a couple things I want to go over before we bring Jayson here in front of all of you guys. First of all, how are the crab fries? Well, that's it. How are the crab fries?
Good.
They were great. Did everyone get crab fries? All right, that was. I want to thank Chickies and Pete's here in Glassboro for doing that. They've got the QR code right here. Not a QR code. It's just a regular promo. If you go into Chickies and Pete's, it's on the Pizza with the Pros group me chat. I'll put it in there. Jenna, remind me to put it in there. The Pizza with the Pros group me chat. We'll put this in there. You get, again, just purchase $15 of food. You get the free crab fries. Yes.
Is that for tonight?
You can do it anytime.
Oh, okay.
Well, we'll put it in, but I got the chairs in the way now. All right, next up, Blue Rocks. We will be announcing next Monday all the details about the Blue Rocks internships. We will have 40 students that will be interning for the Blue Rocks. How about that, Jayson? 40 students.
That's awesome.
That's pretty good, huh? Not bad. This is our 4th year with the Blue Rocks. So we're going to announce everything when the auditions are for the broadcasters, positions that are available. All those things will be discussed next Monday here at Pizza with the Pros. So you need to attend Pizza with the Pros so you find everything out and you'll learn about all the dates and all the deadlines when you have to have everything done. We want to welcome Mark Jackson. How went to Mark Jackson last year at Pizza with the Pros? Was he awesome or what? He was awesome. He was awesome. So Mark Jackson we're glad to have him as part of our professional in residence. He grew up here in Philadelphia, went to Roman Catholic, Temple University, and then he went to the NBA and he played for the Sixers for a couple seasons. But he is our professional in residence. So now we have all 3 of these guys as our professional residents. So you will have them if you take Inside the Front Office or if you take History of Sport in Philadelphia, which I teach. All 3 of those gentlemen come to those classes and talk to students and offer their insights about their experiences. And it's a little different for Inside the Front Office. We get into like Ruben. Anybody here take Inside the Front Office when Ruben was there? Yeah. He gets into details about his trades and things that he does. It's awesome. And Mike Quick as well just started with us last semester, and then Mark will be with us this semester. So a great group here to be with us for the foreseeable future, at least. All right. This man right here, let's give a warm welcome to Jayson Stark. Have a seat right here, Jayson. Actually, you know what? Before we do, look at it now. First of all, do I need to say more? If you've gone into the Baseball Hall of Fame, I don't care what recognition it is. You know, you didn't hit any home runs. 0. But you wrote about a lot of them. So 2019, we're going to talk about that. 2024, this is new. Sports writing inductee into the National Sports Media Association Hall of Fame. That's national. That is a huge recognition. Great credit to Jayson. And you don't see here, the chairs are in the way, but 17 years at ESPN. I did receive an Emmy for his work on Baseball Tonight. Worked at the Philadelphia Inquirer for 21 years, and now has been with The Athletic. Who subscribes to The Athletic? I do. All right. Yeah. All right, good. We got a good number. All right. So, and you've been with The Athletic for how long?
Since 2018.
2018. All right, have a seat. All right, let's get you're going to take that one right there. You get your water? Perfect.
I do.
So, first of all, let's start with the recognition of going into the National Sports Hall of Fame for the National Sports Media Association Hall of Fame.
Yeah, it's crazy. First of all, thank you to everybody who is here. This is an amazing crowd. I think we have through the Marlins, so thank you. I just learned this 2 weeks ago that I got elected to this Hall of Fame, and I'm going in with Joe Buck, Andrew Kramer, Tim McCarver, and a guy named Roger Kahn, who wrote the Boys of Summer, really famous book. And I started looking through all of the winners of that award, and it's surreal to think that I'm on that list. When the ballot came out, I told my family, I'll probably finish last, and somehow I won the sports writer slot. So it's an amazing honor. There's a huge Hall of Fame induction ceremony where they also honor the sports writers and sportscasters of the year from all around the country to North Carolina on July 1st. So if you're in the neighborhood, stop by.
That is awesome. Let's give a round of applause for that. That is impressive. That is awesome. All right, so let's go back to your early days. All right, where'd you grow up?
I grew up in Northeast Philadelphia.
Northeast Philly.
Yes.
And when did baseball become your love?
I can't remember a time when I didn't want to be a baseball writer. this is the truth. I'm one of those crazy people where I got to do the thing that I always dreamed about doing for as long as I can remember dreaming about doing anything. I'm going to say 10 years old. I had this dream of growing up to be a baseball writer. My mother was a writer. She worked at a newspaper in Philadelphia that went out of business, but she loved writing. She devoured great sports writing and was always showing me great stories that I should read. Had a lot of writer friends, my mom and dad did. And so I got the love of writing from her. I'm not 100% sure where the baseball thing came from. I didn't exactly grow up in the Ripken family, but we do love sports. And I don't know how to explain this, but on the wall of my office, there's a photo of me and my sister. We're walking home from school. I was 10, she was 9. We're separated by about a year and a half. And underneath it is a little composition that she wrote. I was in 5th grade at the time. She was in 4th grade. And this is how it starts. If you ever want to know anything about baseball, you should ask my brother. I was 10. And like how I wound up doing that thing that I'm doing now. And and living the life I've gotten to lead. I understand that not many people in the world get to do that. So I know how lucky I am.
So I imagine working for the Philadelphia Inquirer, you thought, oh man, I got my dream job. And then you've not only surpassed that, I mean, you've done incredible things on a national scale.
Well, that was a great gig.
I mean, but for 21 years at the Inquirer.
I loved my time at the Inquirer. I grew up as a Philadelphian and a Philadelphia sports fan, and it was almost complete happenstance that I wound up getting hired by the Inquirer to cover baseball, but that was a great job. Had so much fun. We had an amazing staff. Al Morganti was actually the best man at my wedding. He's in the Hockey Hall of Fame. I'm in the Writers Wing of the Baseball Hall of Fame. It's a crazy thing to think about. And I could have stayed there for my whole career. Except then ESPN wanted to hire me, and my advice to any of you, if ESPN ever wants to hire you, you should say yes. So that's what I did.
And 17 years there.
Yep. This is another bizarre thing, but I went there in 2001. I was the first full-time baseball writer at ESPN.com. They did the whole site with freelancers until they hired me. And that was an amazing experience to work there. And people are always asking me how I was working at the Philadelphia Inquirer and then suddenly got hired by ESPN. And the answer is that for most of the time I worked at the Inquirer, I was the baseball columnist. And because of that, my best friends were people like Tim Kirkshin, who worked at ESPN, and Peter Gammons, who worked at ESPN. So I knew everybody at ESPN. And when they decided they wanted to gear up in their coverage of baseball, Peter, Tim, people who worked there said, you've got to hire Jayson Stark. And so it's a true story. I was just walking around spring training one day, and I got a call from Jeff Schneider, who was the coordinating producer of Baseball Tonight. And he said, hey, we're going to be expanding the number of Baseball Tonights we do and the website. And we'd like you to come up here for a screen test and meet everybody. And I said, sure, I'll be back in Philadelphia in 3 weeks. And he said, I wasn't thinking 3 weeks. I was thinking tomorrow. And I said, well, I can't come tomorrow. I have a job. But how about if I come like next Monday? And he said, okay, it's a deal. So I don't is there anybody who works at the Philadelphia Inquirer here? No?
No.
Okay, so I sneaked out of spring training and didn't tell anybody. I wrote a story, left it on my computer, didn't send it till the next day. Okay, I got on the plane, flew to Connecticut, got up the next morning, went into the campus at Bristol. I met everybody in the building. They put me on the Baseball Tonight set with cameras, with an anchor, and we chit-chatted for 10 minutes. They threw a bunch of stuff at me that I didn't know was coming. And when the lights went up, they said, you're exactly what we were looking for. When can you start? And that's kind of how it happened. It was wild.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
was
All right.
amazing.
All right, so that's a little insight into Jayson. Questions now from you guys. Who's ready to start? Go. You can go first. Beautiful.
Can you explain the process of researching a story for a sports article?
Sure. I'm a research nut. I don't ever write anything without thinking going in. I need to tell people something they don't know. And so the way to do that takes many forms. But I can tell you that I keep a notebook, a daily log of stuff in baseball that I find interesting. And it's story ideas. It could be big stories, or it could just be like little threads of things I might want to talk about on TV or the radio, or as part of a notes column or whatever. So I'm constantly thinking of the ideas, because the ideas is where it all starts. And then when I go into writing the story, then and we have a lot of tools now we could use to gather information before we ever start the reporting process. I'm so big on those. So I can tell you, I'm writing a story I think it's going to run next week, about how the schedule in baseball has changed and all the impact that those changes will have. So what I've done already is I've gone through all the teams that made the playoffs last year and broke down their record against the teams in their division, teams in other divisions, how they did against good teams, how they did against bad teams, how many games they had to play against the other contenders, how many games they got to play against the lousy teams. And so I already have a perspective on what I think happened. And then today I had a 45-minute interview with the deputy commissioner at Major League Baseball, who's in charge of scheduling, and told him all the stuff that I was thinking about, that I'd observed, just to get his perspective on why these things are happening, like where I'm way off in the wrong direction, where I'm onto something. And so there's a whole process of thinking about the idea, thinking through the idea, and gathering some perspective and information before you ever start talking to anybody, and then taking it from there. The most important thing you can do in writing any story is make sure that it is very thoroughly thought through, researched, and checked out.
That's impressive. How many hours would you say you put into that research?
For that story I just talked about?
Yeah. And this is one story we're talking about.
I'm
right?
glad, like, if you ask my wife, she'd say too many. But what I often do is I could be sitting around with my family watching TV at night, except I've got an iPad and a notebook with me, and I'm just fiddling with ideas like that. So I don't feel like the meter's running,
Okay.
but I'm constantly working on these ideas and thinking about these ideas.
Gotcha. Okay. All right, Sean, you ready?
Yeah.
What do you got?
Hey, Jason. How
Sean.
are you?
Thanks for coming, Sean.
You're welcome. You got my first question, but I have another one for you. What was it about Bear Bond that everybody didn't like?
That's a loaded question, Sean. Well, I run into a lot of players. Some great players, some not so great players. Barry might be the greatest player that I ever saw. But was he the greatest player to deal with that I ever met? I wouldn't say that. Barry he has a great aptitude for baseball, and he has a level of charm about him, but he turns that charm on and off. And if you get a day where the button's off, it's not a great experience. It's not. And he could, maybe you've read about this, heard the stories, seen the stories, but Barry had a giant easy chair in the Giants clubhouse. Giant. And he took up 3 lockers in the corner of the clubhouse. And it was his space. And, there's some players that other players gravitate toward. I would say Barry is a guy that his teammates were wary of. There might be a couple who were in his inner circle, but mostly it was Barry and there was everybody else. And so it was always a funny dynamic. Barry could be, if he was in the mood, he could be awesome, but he wasn't in the mood to deal with people like me very often.
Fair enough. Okay, who's next? Good, Ron.
What would you say is like good advice to interview after?
You have to talk the language of the sport, I think is the first thing. I try to know something about everybody that I interview. When I walk into a clubhouse, first of all, the first thing I do is say, who's the funniest guy in the room? Okay, so always gravitate towards those people. I never walk into a clubhouse without questions I want to ask, stories I'm thinking about, working on. And so when I approach a player, I might make small talk because that's important to get to know something about a player. There's always, how'd you come to love baseball? Why are you a switch hitter? Like there's always those kinds of questions, but it all starts with knowing the player, knowing the athlete, and you can get a sense before you ever speak to him of the stuff that makes him tick. So I don't ever feel like I want to talk above anybody or talk below anybody. I want to talk right at them, look them in the eye, and have a real conversation. Always be prepared. Always listen is the other thing. I feel like I see interviews where people in my line of work know they want to ask a question and then they already are thinking about the next question instead of listening to the answer of the question. And sometimes the answer to that question unlocks not just the next question, but the next 10 questions and some great story that you didn't even know you were going to tell. And so then you just follow the conversation where it goes. But that art of making conversation and knowing who you're talking to, I think that's where it all starts.
Right here.
What do you think from when you got into the industry? What types of differences and comparisons do you have from when you got into today?
It's a great question because I've watched my business evolve so much. Look, when I grew up, I said I wanted to be a baseball writer. I wanted to be a writer. I didn't know that I was going to be this multimedia phenomenon, right? Whatever it is I am now. But that's the way the business works now. It used to be, when I first went to work for the Philadelphia Inquirer, newspapers were how people found out stuff. That was the predominant way that sports fans learned everything. And that's not true anymore. So now you have to tell the stories a million different ways. So you have to be comfortable. I think writing is still a hugely important skill because you have to be able to communicate. And writing's a basic form of putting your thoughts into some kind of coherent form. But you have to be able to write. You have to be able to speak into a camera. You have to be able to speak into a microphone. You have to know how to use 500 forms of social media, and they're all changing all the time. You have to understand the difference between a podcast and a radio show and doing a TV hit, and how different your answers have to be and how different the conversation might turn out to be. You have to tell the story every way it can be told now. So that's the one big thing. The other thing is we live in such a 24/7 world now, and I always tell people who are in my business how important it is to stay current. And so that doesn't just mean understanding how to tell the story 100 different ways. It means people really care about that thing they care about right now. And too many people that I started out in the business with, they didn't want to do TV. They didn't want to do social media, and they lost interest and they lost jobs because of it. So understanding the urgency of the 24/7 world and understanding all the different ways that you have to connect with your audience, I think those are the two biggest things.
I just want to bring Professor Jones here for a moment, because in the previous class, in our intro sports communication and media class, you said ESPN, they said, what's the one thing they wanted you as broadcasters to master or learn this year? TikTok.
How's your TikTok skills?
How's your TikTok skills?
Not great.
Not great. There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
See, as I said, that all this social media is all changing dramatically, and we're still trying to figure it out. When I got to The Athletic, we had under 300,000 subscribers, and now I think the last time they updated this, we were close to 5 million, and we used Twitter as probably the number one way to grow our subscriptions. And you can't do that now. Okay. So we're trying to figure out what to do about X. And if we're not going to use X, what social media platforms are the most effective in terms of reaching an audience, building an audience, and increasing our subscription base? And I'll be honest, they don't know what the heck to do about TikTok. So if you figure it out, let me know, okay?
They're searching for engagement, so by any way necessary, they're trying.
And that's where it's at.
All right, so
It really is.
let's do a little informal poll. All right, how many of you are on TikTok? There you go. There you
Okay.
go. That's who they're trying to reach.
I know,
They're
right?
all on TikTok, right? So Chinese have figured it out. That
Okay.
TikTok is where we should be. All right, who's next? In the back, go ahead.
Say that again. Oh, the useless information stuff. Yeah, we just changed the name of it to the Weird and the Wild, but it's still useless information, except it's not really useless. It's kind of our private joke. I appreciate that. Thanks. My mother always told me that I should write a book and call. I never saw that before, and I never did write that book. But I just kind of my whole MO in covering baseball is every day, every week, every month, every year, something bizarre happens in baseball that's either the opposite of what you thought was going to happen or something that literally has not happened in 100 years. And having fun with that stuff is my favorite thing about covering baseball.
All right, next up, right here.
So, you said it's always good to be prepared all the time, right?
All the time.
So, is there a moment ever throughout your career where you weren't prepared and you look back on it as a learning experience? You're like, damn, man, I got to be on my game now from here on out.
Well, I can tell you a couple of stories. But when I got out of college, I worked very briefly covering suburban news at the Providence Journal in Providence, Rhode Island. And then they had an opening in the sports department, and I was so excited to get out of the suburban news game. Okay, so my first day as a sports writer after college, they sent me to cover a Bryant College basketball game. I'll admit this now. I didn't know anything about Bryant College or Bryant College basketball. I didn't know anything. And I went and covered this game. And when I went to their locker room after the game, I realized I didn't know what to ask. I had no idea what to ask. And I thought, that's never going to happen to me again. Okay? Never. I never covered, I don't write off games that much anymore, but if I ever cover any game of anything, I know how everybody on that team, on both teams, has been doing lately. And I told you I keep this daily log. I write down in a book every day of the baseball season how every single team did. How many they've won in a row, how many they've lost in a row, who was the pitcher, where they are in the standings. And this is dumb, okay? Because there's a device in my pocket that would tell me all that. But if I write it down, I have to pay attention to it. There's something about the act of looking at the box score, or looking at the line on the screen, putting it down in a book, and paying attention to every team every day, that it just somehow it burns it into my brain. I don't know if that works for everybody, but it works for me. There are times, like I do a lot of live TV, and you know this. You're on live TV, you really don't know what's going to happen next. You can plan, you go to a show meeting, you plan out the whole show, everything's great, okay? You know just what you're going to do, and then Bryce Harper hits 4 home runs, okay, or something. And the only way to be ready for all those surprises is to think before you ever sit on the set about what the surprises could be. So I do a lot of anticipating and preparing. Preparation is everything.
After they sign such agents.
Well, I mean, I'm getting ready to go to spring training, and I've got 2 pages of story ideas. You know, so I probably have 50 story ideas. They could easily change when those guys sign. 2019, I started spring training in Arizona, and on the last day I was there, I was flying out. Manny Machado signed with the Padres. So I went to the Manny Machado press conference on my way to the airport, and then wrote the column in the airport waiting area or something. Then I got home, unpacked, repacked. Don't ask me why we do this, but my wife and I drive to spring training. It's not that conveniently located, but we drive to Florida. And as we're driving to Florida, literally the one day of the year when I'm going to drive for 14 hours, Bryce Harper's deal with the Phillies gets done. And I wrote that column in the car using my phone as a Wi-Fi hotspot and sent it from the car. So that's kind of the cool thing about doing what we do is, I mean, we're constantly thinking about that next story idea, and then something drops out of the sky and changes everything. So when those guys sign, that'll be a big deal. And if I'm in Florida and I can get to that place where they sign, I'm sure I will. And that's the fun of it. I might have to drive 500 miles that day, but it's still the fun of it.
Very good. Noah.
So you're really you're really one of my favorite people on MLB Network,
Thank you.
other than Jim Tomei, because he's my favorite player of all time.
Good choice.
This is a 2-part question. Who is your favorite player that was like the nicest to you? And what was your reaction when you got inducted into the Hall of Fame in 2019?
Wow, my favorite player. I have a long list. You know, I've really developed some great professional relationships with a lot of players and former players. I don't know if you know Ryan Dempster is. He pitched for the Cubs and Red Sox, and he just called me on my way here just to say hi. And he read the thing I wrote the other day on Theo Epstein joining the Red Sox or Fenway, right? And he just wanted to talk about it. So I'm very lucky to have those relationships. I do a podcast with Doug Landville, Starkville Podcast. Check it out. And Doug was a guy, he's a little younger than me, and he went to Penn. And when he went to Penn, he decided I was his favorite writer. Didn't know him then, but when he got traded to the Phillies, I was working at the Inquirer, and I knew he was a really smart, really funny guy, and introduced myself, and we just had this amazing connection because Doug Landville was a guy you could ask him anything. I still do. It could be the stupidest, craziest, funniest question of the day, or it could be something really deep and thoughtful, and he has an answer for it. You know, the Phillies had a week where, it's just one of those weeks where it just rained every day in Philadelphia, and they had 2-hour rain delays every day for a week, and so if I'm going to write about all the rain delays and he's on the team, I'm going to ask Doug Lanville what that's been like. And he's the only, because of that, he's the only player I've ever talked to who used the phrase time-space continuum to describe what it's like to keep coming in the clubhouse every day, but never actually playing because it's raining. So I'll pick him just because we're still doing our shtick. The Hall of Fame. I don't know how to begin to describe that. I went in 2019, and I'm not allowed to describe myself as a Hall of Famer because the writers' wing and the broadcasters' wing are separate. So they're Hall of Famers. We're honorees is the technical term. But those Hall of Fame players didn't treat me that way. I went in with Mariano Rivera, Mike Messina, Edgar Martinez, Roy Halladay, obviously wasn't able to be there. It was just an incredible experience. Everything about it. We had over 100 family and friends who came there just for me from all over the world, literally. Those players were amazing to me. You mentioned Jim Thome, right? I got on the bus with the greatest players who ever lived, and also I was on this bus. And I didn't know what to do. I didn't know where to sit. I didn't know anything. And Jim Thome was sitting on the bus with an empty seat right next to him, and he looked me in the eye and he patted the seat, like, come here, sit next to me. And he went out of his way that day and through the whole weekend to help me through this overpowering experience. And I said to him, so Jim, let me ask you something, because you hear different things. When you're giving your speech, because he'd gotten in the year before, did you look at your family or was it too hard? And he looked me in the eye and he said, you gotta look at those people. That's what it's all about. You gotta look right into the eyes of everybody in your family when you talk about them, because that's what makes this possible. So thank you. Okay, so then I did that, and I'll never forget the looks in the eyes of my wife and my kids and all my family members who were there. It was so special. And that was because of Jim Thome. Just did that for me. And then the next day, that was that day. Okay, so I'm waiting to ride the bus to go give my Hall of Fame speech. I was the first person there because I'm not going to be late for my own speech. And so I sit down at this table, a couple people from the Hall of Fame are there. And so we're just chit-chatting. And now the greatest players who ever lived are walking in the room. And Ken Griffey Jr. actually sits down and he chit-chats a little bit. Okay, and Paul Molitor sits down and he chats a little bit. And so I'm sitting there and we're talking. And like all of a sudden, I looked around and realized who was in the room. I can't even describe how overwhelming that is. The greatest players alive are all in this room, but it's my day. Because the broadcaster that year was no longer living and had been dead for 50 years, and they weren't even able to contact anybody in his family. So all these Hall of Famers are going to sit behind me and listen to me give my speech. It was an experience. Okay, so I looked around, realized who was in the room, and I thought, I need a minute here. So I got up, I kind of got over to the corner of the room just to look around, and I thought, I'm going to go to the men's room because it was down the hall. So I started walking down the hall to the men's room, and Jeff Bagwell decides to walk with me, and he says, how you doing? And I said, Jeff, I'm doing okay, but I just started looking around at who else was in the room, and I started asking myself, what am I doing here? And he said, oh, yeah, I think the same thing. And I said, wait a second. You realize you're one of them, right? You're a Hall of Famer? He said, yeah, I'm a Hall of Famer. But I'm not a Hall of Famer the way those guys are Hall of Famers. And that really helped me kind of get through that portion of the day. So it was amazing.
Wow. That deserves a round of applause, man. That's an awesome story. Holy cow. How many of you have been to Cooperstown? Yeah. If you haven't been,
First of all, you love baseball, you got to go to Cooperstown. It's
Yeah.
just a magical place.
Magic Kingdom. It is.
And then for the enshrinement, it's special as well. So very neat spot. Great question. Great stuff. So, all right, who's next? Right here. Go ahead.
What are some of the most important tips to getting a baseball career and sustaining a baseball career? Because I know you've been doing this for a while. You're a baseball expert, so am I.
So, are you talking about a career working in baseball, or as in the media, or as a what do you have in mind?
Formal. So
Not as a baseball player, right?
no.
Okay. So,
Right.
as a member of the media.
Yes. What are the most important things to doing that career and sustain that?
Yeah, the longevity. To
Yeah.
maintain longevity.
Well, that's a much trickier question now than it was a month ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, because it's pretty easy to see what's happening in modern media. It means SI.com and the LA Times and the Messenger, and I don't have to go through the list, the Sporting News, just the number of layoffs that you see in these media, even just among the media giants that I wanted to work for growing up. It's frustrating. It's disturbing. But I think the most important thing is not necessarily thinking that those are the only places to work. The first thing that you have to do is find a way to get on the other side of the door so that people can see talent and see how much you love what you do and the relationships you can build from doing that. That's challenging. It's really challenging now. But thinking outside the box is a great way to do that. You know what MLB Trade Rumors is?
Yes.
Okay, so the guy who started MLB Trade Rumors didn't know that's what he was doing. Okay, he was a baseball fan. He loved the trade deadline. He loved the offseason. He thought somebody should really keep track of all these rumors about who's signing where, who's getting traded where. And so that's what he started doing. He didn't know he was going to quit his job and hire a staff and get millions of page views a year. That just kind of happened by accident. Do you know what the Hall of Fame tracker is?
Yes.
Ryan Thibodeau, same story. He just was interested in the Hall of Fame. He thought this would be fun to keep track of everybody's Hall of Fame vote when they post their ballots. And now he's got a staff, and his site is a constant source of conversation for 3 months every winter. I just read a story. It was a Washington Post story, but I think the Inquirer.com also ran it about this woman who she started interviewing people on the street about their jobs and how much money they make. I don't know if anybody saw this. And people loved talking to her about this. And now she quit her job. She and her husband both quit their jobs. And they're just doing these videos with people about how much money they make and posting them all over social media, including TikTok. And the story said they had $1 million in revenues last year. So they didn't know they were doing that. So there are a lot of ways now to think outside that box. My daughter, Hallie, went to Syracuse and was a sport management major. And part of her job was an internship for a whole semester. And trust me, I had nothing to do with this. Her internship was with Major League Baseball. The school placed her there. She did a summer internship at Major League Baseball and a full semester as an intern at Major League Baseball, just at the time when they were getting really excited about the possibilities of social media. And the next thing she knew, she was actually had the most seniority of any social media person at Major League Baseball. And it was a ticket to her to a really fun job and fun life working with people she loved, her best friends. So it's just being open-minded to that thing you do first. It might not be that thing you think you're going to do, but then once you get inside the door, whether you're in baseball media or you're working for a team or whatever, working for a league, whatever it is, then the whole process can start of climbing the ladder. But I was talking earlier about staying current. It's the most important thing. Is just always evolving with the business you're in and with the sport you're in.
You mentioned all these changes. The Athletic was bought by the New York Times.
Yes.
So now you work for the New York Times, and the New York Times
I mean, I
laid off its staff in sports.
yes.
And so does work that you write about end up in the New York Times?
It does. Now, the Athletic, when I first got there, was just this funky little startup. And then the New York Times bought it for a lot of money, which is a good thing for us in the sense that when you invest that much money in something, you definitely want it to live on and succeed. So that part's been great. I don't really work for the New York Times. I don't have any direct contact with the New York Times. I still work for the same people I work for and write for The Athletic. And that part of my job hasn't changed. But just last week, I was in Cooperstown for Hall of Fame election week, doing TV all week, but also writing. So I wrote a column about what we learned from the Hall of Fame election. And the next day, it ran full page in the New York Times print edition. I didn't even know that was happening until Jane Forbes Clark, the woman who runs and funds the Hall of Fame, came up to me and said, "Hey, I loved your story today in the New York Times." And I said, "Great." It was news to me. So when I went back to the hotel, the first thing I did was wander into the gift shop, and they actually had a copy. So I bought it. So I now have 2 stories that I've written for The Athletic that wound up in the New York Times. The other one, the first one was about the Braves and their pursuit of history last year. And Phillies had some other ideas about that. But I wrote this story about the Braves. And this is maybe like 4 days later. My editor said, "Hey, your story on the Braves is going to be in the New York Times print edition tomorrow." And I have to admit, there was something really cool about that. So that night we were going out to dinner. We called the local grocery store because that's one place you can still find an actual copy of the New York Times in print. They saved me one. We went and picked it up on our way to dinner. We got to dinner. We sat at the table. We spread out the paper. I had a whole page of the New York Times, and we were so excited. And then my wife spilled tomato sauce all over it. So there is a downside to that print thing.
All right. Next one. We got about 15 more minutes. All right. Go ahead, Aiden.
So from like the transition of like the Inquirer, ESPN, and The Athletic, did you ever use have a specific strategy when you were like running any sort of piece for baseball?
How do you mean that? Because I'm very strategic.
I was saying like if there was like the main thing you look into when you're writing any piece, depending if it's like of course trades and stuff like that, or like games, like interviews you write, like that's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I never walk into a clubhouse without a plan. I never go to a ballpark without a plan, whether I'm supposed to write off that game or not. Because even if you're thinking not, something could always happen and change that in a heartbeat. So always having a plan is a big part of it, and that's really true in everything. You guys know who David Ross is, right? He was catcher for the Cubs, and then he might be the manager of the Cubs. And in between being a player and being the manager, he worked at ESPN. And so we were talking one day, and I said he was a little nervous about like doing games and doing Baseball Tonight shows. And I told him, "All right, when you were a catcher, didn't you have a game plan every day?" "Yeah." "Well, that's what you do when you do a show. You have to have a game plan every day." It depends on what the show is that I'm doing, but if I'm doing MLB Tonight at MLB Network, or if I was doing Baseball Tonight at ESPN, that day, if I had time, or the day before, whatever, I would write down every single game being played that night, who was pitching, and a possible storyline or two to talk about for every single game. So that when you're there, like, you don't know what's going to happen, but you can think through in your mind what's likely to happen. And I told David Ross, like, that's what you do when you're going to the park that night. You're thinking through, what are the storylines? Now they'll have a show meeting first and they'll go over a lot of that stuff. But I find they're very excited when you come to the meeting with the ideas, as opposed to them having to tell you, here's what you're going to talk about. It's supposed to be a collaborative process when you do those shows. So I'm always doing that, and my editors are always thanking me for all these story ideas that I come up with all the time, not even necessarily for myself. I'm happy for other people that I work with to do.
You know, I see Tyler and Nick. There are two sports editors here of the campus newspaper, The Wit. Your early writing, how did that form? You know, who you are today, like, you know, how, because they're, you know, look, they're both juniors, right?
Uh-huh.
And writing a lot now. And
That's great.
What would you say about your early experiences when you started writing?
Well, the first thing I did, the very first day that I walked onto the campus of Syracuse University, was go find the Daily Orange, the school newspaper, right? And say, what do you want me to do? I'll do that. Because I knew, I'd already known that I wanted to be a sports writer. What better way to be a sports writer than to write a lot of sports? And just like if you want to shoot 90% from the free throw line, what do? You shoot a lot of free throws. You want to be a sports writer, you should write a lot. And I think the other element that goes into it that I learned this early on was when I really decided I wanted to be a baseball writer, I didn't just read my favorite writers, I studied them. You know, like Peter Gammons was a hero of mine, and you know, Peter was the first. Everything that I do in my job, Peter did first and better. Okay, but he was the first baseball writer I ever read who, like, he might work the Grammy Awards, and it was Game Story or whatever. You know, it just he had this great awareness of all the cultural phenomena that where baseball players live in and that we all live in, and you could draw a lot of things together as a writer writing about sports. And so I would study his stories from beginning to end. Why did he start with this? What question must he have asked to get that quote? What could he possibly have done to get that stat? So like all of that stuff. Or maybe you don't want to be a writer. Maybe you want to be a sports center anchor. You should be picking out your two favorite sports center anchors and studying everything about them. Go find your old Neil Hartman tapes. Study them.
You said old.
You
said
learn-
old. Old Neil Hartman tapes. Yeah, you got it.
Did I say that?
Yeah,
I did. Well, I always told my kids in sports, you can learn a lot from watching, and that's really true. Even in the media, you can learn a lot by studying and watching the people you admire most in the business.
Really good suggestion. Really good. You know, favorite writers. All right, in the back. Yep.
You said you grew up like a really sports fan. Did you have any challenge putting aside that made them being an effective writer?
Yeah, that's a great question. I thought going in that might be a problem, but then very quickly it became obvious that you can't really do the job that I was doing, covering a team and being a fan of the team you cover, because your audience is not them, right? Your audience is everybody sitting here, and fans don't think the way players think. I had issues. I've had issues with players and managers who stopped talking to me and yelled to everybody in the room, "Don't talk to this guy." You just have to. You have to understand that's part of the job, and it's not personal. It's just what I do versus what they do. But I actually have I have a really good relationship with so many players, but I'm still not a fan. So 2008, the Phillies win the World Series. And I mean, I'm living in a house full of Phillies fans. I'm surrounded every minute of every day by Phillies fans. And I grew up a Philadelphia sports fan. So when the Phillies won that World Series, I understood what that meant to everybody, including the people in my house. And so I tried to write the stories about that team winning the World Series from that perspective, from the perspective of what I knew it meant, not just to the team, but to everybody who cared about that team. So now they win the World Series. And took my daughter to the parade that day. And now we're trying to find our way home. It was nuts. So we're on the Broad Street subway, and there's 3,000 people on this Broad Street subway car, and we're all like crammed in, just trying to breathe. And I see a guy across the car, and he's like making eye contact with me. And now here he comes. He's like wriggling his way through all these people. And he gets to where we're hanging onto this pole, and he looks at me, and he breaks into tears. I swear this is a true story. My daughter can testify to this. And he says, "Thank you. Thank you for telling the story of this team the way we see it, the way Philadelphia sees it, and not the way the rest of the world sees us." So that's kind of the balancing act that you can do. You know, you're understanding what you're watching, but you don't have to be that guy. Okay? That's kind of the way it's done.
That's pretty powerful. That's one thing that, that fandom, you kind of tell them it's going to go away when you start covering teams on a regular basis. It does go away, but your love for the sport does not go away, and the reason why you got into it in the first place doesn't go away.
Right.
But you're not, pom poms and rooting on the team the way you would when you were as a kid.
Yeah, I'll tell you a quick story. Because people always asking me how I can still love what I do so much. I always tell people it's a labor of love, but it's a good thing because there's a lot of labor. I mean, you do wind up. The sports world doesn't operate the way the rest of the world operates. So you work a lot of nights, you work a lot of weekends. I wouldn't say my wife was that excited about me writing a big Theo Epstein column on a Saturday in February the other day, but I did that. And just sometimes you get busy. There's a lot of hours in the job. So I can't remember what this was, but this was in November. There was just like this little run of stuff where 3 nights in a row, I wound up working late. And she gets it. She's awesome. She loves sports. She was a volleyball coach. So my wife's awesome. She is. But in the off season, she's not that excited about me working day and night. So the 3rd night in a row, and I finally come downstairs, she said, "You got to stop this. You got to stop working all these nights. It's the off season." And so I said, "I don't know how to tell you this because I know you don't want to hear this, but it's kind of fun." Like you're doing some story that's really fun to do, and I enjoy it. But life's one big juggling act when you do this. I always knew I wanted to write a book. I never felt like I had time to write a book. This is one of those books.
There you go.
This is Wild Pitches. This is my ESPN Greatest Hits book. But the first book was a book on the most overrated and underrated players in baseball history. And I did it for Triumph Books. And I kind of had to be talked into doing that book. But I'm so glad that I eventually said yes, even though it made Scott Boras really mad at me. Because, again, there's so many ways to tell the story. And that was a chance, especially that book, to tell my very favorite stories about all kinds of players that I loved growing up or covered or whatever, just all my favorite funky little tidbits about all of them. It was really fun, really intense, but again, I'm so glad that I wrote that one in particular because then it led to the next 2.
All right. Who else? In the back with the Phillies hat.
I was wondering what goes into casting a Hall of Fame ballot.
Yeah, it seems really easy to people who don't have a vote. I take it so seriously. I spend weeks on my ballot, hours and hours and hours, and I'm always thinking about it when I'm not like physically researching it or whatever. And I strongly believe in understanding that every player on the ballot is there for a reason, and spending time on the career of every player on the ballot, because you have to be a really great player just to get on the ballot. And then narrowing it down, having a reason for why I do, why I don't. writing a column explaining my ballot. I think it's very important that we be able to explain how we vote, why we didn't vote for so-and-so, why we did vote for this guy. And when people disagree, I just tell them you're supposed to. But like, it's a lot, man. Andrew Jones was a guy, I didn't vote for him for 6 years. And then I finally voted for him this year. And I still don't know if I did the right thing. And so that held up my ballot for a week before I sent it in. And then after I sent it in, I'm still thinking, I don't know if I should have voted for that guy. And there's always that player who's on the edge. So this is me. I know other people like this too, but some people get their ballot, they send it back in one day. They give us till December 31st. I send mine in like December 30th because I just want to give it all the time that I have.
Utley Rollins, Hall of Famers.
We're just having this conversation. I think Chase Utley is going to get in.
Okay.
Which is interesting because Jimmy Rollins has the more traditional case. You know, Jimmy Rollins had a career unlike any shortstop who ever played baseball. 2,400 hits, 400 stolen bases, 200 homers, 800 steals, 800 extra base hits, sorry. Most hits in the history of his franchise, MVP, 4 Gold Gloves, longest hitting streak by any player since 1890, whatever it is, who played shortstop. And that's a career no other shortstop has ever had. And yet Chase got twice as many votes as Jimmy. And I've heard from so many people from Philadelphia about this since the election who they don't understand this. But we're kind of evolving as voters away from these magic numbers, these round counting numbers that we used to use to vote. And we're gravitating more towards players who had peaks of greatness, who were winners. And that's Chase's whole aura. And he had 6 years unlike basically any second baseman of modern times except for Joe Morgan and Jackie Robinson. And it's 6 years. I would have said when he retired, that's not enough. But I voted for him because I can see how we're all evolving as voters. And the reason I think he'll get in is 2 years, Buster Posey's coming on the ballot with 1,500 hits. That's it. But an incredible 10-year peak. And he'll pave the way for guys like Chase who have 1,800 hits. And then what's interesting to me is whether Chase helps elevate Jimmy in the voting. They played more games together than any double play combination in history that ever appeared on a ballot together. Wow. So it's a cool thing.
All right, we're going to do one last question. All right, Jordan, go ahead. You got it.
Just to key back when we're talking about the Hall of Fame votes. I'm a Yankee fan. I'm a Yankee fan grew up. I wanted to hear your take on, do you think Thurman Munson should be in the Hall of Fame?
You know, when I was in Cooperstown last week, we did a fun exercise because we did so many hours of shows. And one of them was best players at every position not in the Hall of Fame. And Thurman Munson was number one on my catcher list. And again, he was like, it was very difficult to evaluate him at the time he first became a candidate because he died in a plane crash, died young. These magic counting numbers we were talking about obviously weren't there. And the voters of that generation were really tough. And they didn't think he had done enough. But if now we're going to evolve toward guys with these great peaks of winning, that's him. So if we could go back in time, if I could ride the time machine and vote on Thurman Munson, I would vote.
One of my favorite players growing up was Thurman Munson.
Yeah, good choice.
You know,
really good.
And then so tragically, that he passed. Let's give a round of applause to Jayson Stark. Go.
Move out of the way of the projector here.
What's that? No, you're fine right there. This guy's coming next week, Pat McCarthy. So you know Tom McCarthy if you're here in Philadelphia. His son Pat works for the New York Mets. He's also has done some Phillies games when he's filling in for his dad actually on occasion.
Yes.
And then for 5 years he did the Lehigh Valley Iron Pigs and also does college basketball stuff, knows Professor Jones quite well. But he will be here next week. So thank you so much for coming, and we'll see you guys here next week. Thank you, Jason.